About that. The elf representing them took a quick look at the twins. Aura. Mare. It looks like your drinks are nearly finished. Why don't you go and get some more? Okay. Understood Ains-sama. Let's go Mare. Splendid. Ains admired Aura's quick wit. If he was in Aura's place, he wouldn't have understood so quickly that he was being told indirectly to get away for a while. Or perhaps his working adult senses would have instantly understood it. One could stand to reason that Aura was better than Albedo or Demiurge at reading the mood. Ains could imagine Demiurge with a grin saying, "So that's what it is, Ains-sama." Those two would completely misunderstand my intentions, to the point where I sometimes doubt if they are doing it intentionally. Or are they really doing it intentionally? Aura dragged away the still puzzled Mare by his arms. Ains spoke after they were distant enough. Can you say it now? Why yes. The elf replied, after confirming that the twins are far enough from them with a quick glance. A dark elf's sense of hearing was better than a human's, and rangers like Aura were even better at it. The elf before him was probably whispering with that in mind, but it was highly likely that Aura could still hear them. We are already used to our life here, and we cannot return to that life again. This place, Aura-sama and Mare-sama's house, is the best. Ains initially lowered his volume to match the elf's, but he let out his usual voice at the sudden surprise. He thought that they were joking for a moment, but after he saw the other two nodding seriously, he understood that was their true sentiment. First, it seemed like the food quality in Nazarick was on a different level. Elves normally ate fruits, meats, and vegetables by either roasting or boiling them. The amount of passion Nazarick puts into its food was completely different. The elves said with certainty that they were not confident they could ever adjust to their former lives after getting used to the food here. By the way, pizza seemed to be their favorite. I see. Culinary diplomacy does not seem like such a bad idea. Being able to access such fine cuisine should be a point of appeal. Are they dwarves or what? The elves also had other reasons. The level of safety here was also completely different. Even if they lived in a moderately safe place like a village created by druid magic, it was impossible for a year to pass without any casualties occurring due to monsters. In contrast, one could sleep peacefully in Nazarick even without having someone to guard the night. They had a lot to say, but if it was something like this, there was no need to get the twins away from here. As Ains wondered if there were more reasons, she added, and being able to serve those two is a joy. Ains nodded empathetically. Those two were of a similar race to the elves and were cute children to boot. They probably had doubts about serving children, but Aura's and Mare's personalities had likely won them over. Even Ains would select the twins if he was asked which of the floor guardians he would like to serve. No, if someone did ask him, he would probably say something like, "I can't choose because everyone is wonderful." But if he was being honest, it would be those two. Next in line might be Cocytus. He really didn't want to serve the others. Still, he thought this was something that could be said in the twins' presence. Although he thought that they had something else to say, it seemed like this was the end of their talk. Honestly, I don't understand at all. Wasn't it fine for the twins to hear this? Was there something in the previous conversation that would get them reprimanded by the twins? Well, whatever. Very well. Then I want you to continue working in Nazarick as you have done until now. There was no reason to refuse their wish. The elves looked happy upon hearing Ains's response. It didn't seem like they were putting on an act to flatter Ains. Although, if we are talking about employing you formally, we will need to discuss salary and welfare first. I will order someone to look into it. It appeared that the elves did not understand what Ains was talking about, but this was an important issue to him. How these elves were to be treated would become an important factor when they establish friendly relations with the dark elves in the elven country. They could say that after freeing the elves from slavery and looking after the elves were just paying back what they had received. But there was a limit to such excuses. Their present situation of uncompensated labor mirrored the practices of a black company. He did not want the dark elves that might visit here in the future to get such an impression. In that case, he just had to use these three to set Nazarick's precedent as a white company. Ains took a quick glance at the maids around them. They were cupping their hands behind their ears as if to hear them better while trying to make it look like they were resting their chins in their palms. They were not at all concerned about their appearances. He didn't feel like reproaching them since he thought that it was just a display of their loyalty, but he at least wanted them to hide it a little better. I should make a contract with these elves as soon as possible. Also, should I try extending the white company treatment from these elves to the regular maids? He could try, but he was afraid that the maids who just wanted to work more would direct their ire at the elves who were the cause for the increase in their leisure time. Of course, he didn't think they would go as far as killing the elves, but he needed to be careful if he decided to extend the treatment to the maids. Leaving that aside, I want to borrow your help in our excursion to the elven country. I want you to act as guides, if possible. Of course, Aura and Mare will also come with us. It's just that we're not familiar with elven etiquette, so it would help if you were to act as our intermediaries. The elves looked at each other and shook their heads. Forgive us, but we don't have confidence in acting as guides. As for being intermediaries, although we have traveled around our village, we are also not sure about things like etiquette. Is that so? Sorry. You don't need to bow. It would be bothersome to visit an unknown place without a guide, but it was not like he was sure these elves could be of use. If he was going into the unknown anyway, it would be better to not force them to come along. They might even end up becoming a burden. Ains turned around and beckoned Lumiere over. After she brought her face closer to him, Ains whispered, "Just a bit more," and lifted his cup. Of course, the contents of the cup were not touched at all. Just to be sure, he gestured in the twins' direction with his eyes. He thought he was being a bit obtuse, but it seemed like she quickly understood and left with a simple, "Excuse me." And, what is the general opinion on dark elves among you elves? They are splendid beings. Ains wrinkled his brows at the instant, somewhat suspicious response. He would be happy if that was how dark elves were thought of, but their answer felt off. Ains could immediately think of the reason why. It was about Aura and Mare. No, that's not it. I am asking about the relations between the dark elf race and your race of the elves. They are splendid beings. That's not. He probably couldn't do anything about this kind of kowtowing. After being treated as subordinates of the twins for so long, they couldn't possibly say something like, "Dark elves are an inferior race after all." Rather, it would be scarier if they were the kind of people who could say something like that. As I have mentioned before, I want to open diplomatic relations with the elf country. I also want to entrust this to the twins. That's why I want to know how elves as a whole look at dark elves. I don't want them to be mistreated if elven society holds negative opinions of dark elves. So what do you think? I need an honest answer. The elves looked at each other. Honestly, as our village did not have any dark elves, we've only met them here for the first time. That's why we didn't have any opinions about them. The most we know was that they migrated from the north to the Great Forest. We've heard of their dark skins from hearsay and were surprised to see that was true. I don't remember the villagers saying anything bad about the dark elves, but I would ask you to keep in mind that this is only about our village. It looked like they were no longer trying to flatter him or tell any lies. So the younger, maybe calling them young was stretching it a bit. Elves didn't have any bad opinions against dark elves. Even though they were a minority, it looked like they weren't being persecuted. Perhaps it was because the elves didn't have the leeway for such things when they were being threatened by an external force, the theocracy. Or perhaps the forest was just that much of a difficult place to live in. By the way, what about the undead? Enemies that sully the forest. Disgusting beings. We rarely encounter any though. Yes. Immediate answers. While Ains wondered why they weren't taking into consideration the feelings of the twins' master, he couldn't say that out loud. He certainly asked them to speak honestly just now, but this was too honest. These girls were the type who would get fired because they truly believed in the CEO's words when they were told to be informal. Still, with that established, he was now certain that he could not be the emissary. Maybe this was for the best. He could use this as an excuse to not be the emissary. It was certainly not because Ains wasn't talented enough. Or should he take the steps in proper order, dispatch diplomats, start diplomatic relations, and then head over to the elven country? But we don't have such diplomats. The fact that we can't trust the human officials in charge of internal affairs is a weak point. Or maybe there are some and I just don't know about it. In that case, how about asking Albedo to dispatch adventurers? No, that system isn't stable enough yet to send them out to represent the nation, or maybe I am wrong. After all, it's me we're talking about. If he informed Albedo about this, she would probably say that the adventurers would work just fine. But The critical issue here is the lack of time. Due to the hostilities with the theocracy, the elven country was pretty much pushed into a corner. This had been the case since before these elves were captured. If things went badly, it was entirely possible that the elven country would be destroyed soon. The collapse of the elven country was not a setback for Ains, because they would be far more effective in establishing diplomatic relations if the Sorcerer Kingdom could extend their help in that scenario. So, would it be better if they just waited for the collapse? That was not the case. They didn't have the luxury of watching the situation from the sidelines, especially because he highly valued the rarity of the Dark Elf lives. Maybe I should just send the two of them ahead. No, I can't do that. I don't feel comfortable sending them alone into an unknown place. Although I understand that they are level 100 NPCs and are not children, we should just ignore the stuff on international relations and concentrate on getting them friends. I should also go with them just as I have planned. He had no plans to join in the war with the theocracy and save the elven country at this point in time. Ains didn't want to turn the theocracy into the Sorcerer Kingdom's enemy due to his independent action. He wanted to know Albedo and Demiurge's thoughts on this matter, but he feared that they might find out his skull was empty if he did that. If Ains couldn't manage the conversation, his idiotic utterances might end up being taken seriously and cause damage to Nazarick in the future. It's not a bad idea to tell them to evacuate just the Dark Elves after visiting the Elven country. In that case, is there a need to take someone along other than the twins? It was better to take stealthy guards like Hanzo's along instead of leading something like an army in case he did decide to take someone along. Like that time in the Dwarf Kingdom. I see. Ains stared at the three elves. They would be in that lizardman's position this time. Is something the matter? Nothing. I am just talking to myself. He could take one among the three with him, leaving the other two here. As long as he held them hostage, the lone elf probably wouldn't do anything that would be negative to Ains. Not bad at all. Even if they understood that they were being held hostage, he could insist that was not the case. Ains looked over to the twins. They immediately understood his intentions. Aura, Mare, and Lumiere returned to the table. By the way, what kind of gifts would make elves happy? Things like gold and gemstones. We don't use metal currency, so I don't think gold would work. I think our village would be most happy about the food and maybe rare herbs. Minor scrapes and such can be healed by magic, but poison and disease need a talented druid to cure them. So portable herbs are highly valued. Not clothes, since we also make them from elf trees. Homes, arrows, and even clothes. Looks like elven druid magic is very convenient. You can't do that, right, Mare? Quote. Why yes. I can't use such magic. Perhaps this peculiar brand of druid magic itself was a mark of elven progress. He wanted those techniques if possible, but Nazarick's residents probably wouldn't be able to use them. This reaffirms the fact that making the residents of this world prostrate before Nazarick and bringing them under its reign would be the main factor that could tip the scales of victory in a hypothetical guild war. But I should assume there were guilds, those who were teleported in the past, who already did this. I should tell this to Albedo and have her look into rethinking our national strategy on war. It stood to reason that if someone like Ains could think of this, other players could as well. Only idiots would think of themselves as someone special. Maybe it will be a good idea to transport large amounts of food through gate upon reaching the elven villages to make them more friendly to the Sorcerer Kingdom. He remembered it being effective in the Dwarf Kingdom. Things would go smoothly if he could just remember his experiences in the Dwarf Kingdom and build on them. I also felt like wanting to run away then too, didn't I? The best way to do this is to first find the Crescent Lake, visit the royal capital that was said to be on its shore to collect information, and then head to Dark Elf's village. We are going to a Dark Elf village. Aura looked like she wanted to say something, but she probably couldn't ask in detail in front of the three elves. If possible, Ains didn't want to tell them they were visiting the Dark Elves village to find them friends. He didn't want them to make friends just because he ordered them to. That's right. That's what I intend to do. I am going to need your help there. He deliberately ignored Aura's behavior, but he still got a pair of energetic affirmations in return. What should I do next? Persuade the others. I can't make the same excuse I used for the Dwarven expedition. He wasn't confident about the next step, but he had to succeed here because he also wanted to use this as the groundwork to bring the concept of paid vacations to Nazarick. At that point, maybe they were waiting for the conversation to die down, the dishes were brought over. Well, enjoy yourselves. With Ains encouraging them, the elves took to the food with relish. 3. What would a person do when faced with a challenge? There were many methods suitable for overcoming one, and this time Ains chose to use the advantage of numbers and location. With Aura and Mare flanking him, Ains sat down on the throne in the audience hall prepared by the Guardians, finally holding the original staff of Ains Ul Gaun after a long time. The ultimate form of the absolute ruler of Nazarick and the guild leader Ains Ul Gaun, so to speak. Still, his victory against the opponent that would be appearing soon was not a certain thing. The opponent was the true last boss. A boss more fearsome than something like the Devourer of the Nine Worlds, Ains thought as he gulped with his non-existent throat. He had already gone through the simulations multiple times, but Ains was just an ordinary person. He likely doesn't even reach the foot of the mountain that was his opponent's intellect. So, there's nothing else to do, except leaving it all to luck. He was placing his hopes on his ad-lib skills. He was sure his future self would pull through. Lumiere, who had been waiting before the entrance, announced the opponent's arrival. Very well, let them enter. Understood, Ain-sama. Everyone should have understood who the opponent was by now. It was none other than the last boss, aka Guardian Overseer, Albedo. The moment she noticed Ains, Albedo switched from her usual smiling face to a serious expression. Please forgive me for making you wait. Seeing Albedo bowing deeply near the entrance, Ains ordered her to lift her head up. Don't worry about it, Albedo. I was already informed that you would be late. So you can even say that you are on time. When contacted through message beforehand, Albedo informed him that because she was doing something in the frozen prison, her appearance might not be suitable for an audience. So, she requested some time to make herself presentable. With no reason to refuse her request, Ains designated this time, 30 minutes more than what Albedo requested, to meet him here. The fact that Albedo still arrived 10 minutes before the designated time was likely due to her personality. Or maybe it was just an ironclad rule for working adults to always arrive before time. Albedo lifted her head, walked before the throne, and kneeled. Ains informed her immediately. Albedo, I am taking a paid vacation starting right this moment. He could make any number of excuses, but every time he did that, the conversation tended to go in weird directions. So he felt it was better to directly state his goal here. Demiurge was absent this time, so it is unlikely to lead to some strange development. Albedo scrunched up her brows slightly while lifting her head up to look at Ains. She then cast her gaze to the left and right of him, probably checking Aura and Mare's reactions to those words. Ains continued to observe Albedo, worried about her reaction. She replied with a serious expression. Including Nazarick, everything in the Sorcerer Kingdom belongs to Ains-sama. What? He couldn't understand what she was saying at all. No, not one bit. How could one arrive at such a response? What leaps of logic, what train of thought would lead one to such a conclusion? How should Ains respond? He could immediately think of two replies. What the hell are you saying? Was one, the other was, yes, just as you have surmised. Of course, he would apply a coat of varnish over those words to make them sound regal. Ains started churning his imaginary brain matter at full power, but there wasn't enough time. Albedo had already thrown the ball into his court, he needed to send it back as soon as possible. It seems like you are misunderstanding something, Albedo. That's not what I am trying to say. He decided to be honest. Would it have been better if he put on an act like he usually did? Yeah, probably. Anyhow, he managed to protect the image of Ains Ul Gaun, the absolute ruler of Nazarick, for now. By sacrificing Suzuki Satoru's heart. Albedo made an expression like she realized something. Please forgive me for my mistake, Ains-sama. She bowed again in panic. No, it's not like I am angry. You don't need to bow. Only scum would enjoy having someone bow their heads for no fault of their own. It seems like the term, paid vacation, caused a misunderstanding. Nazarick did not have salaries or day offs. It stood at the pinnacle of black companies. Therefore, it was highly likely that she thought the term, paid vacation, was a metaphor for something else. You could say this was Ains's fault because he had yet to implement such a system in Nazarick. Of course, Ains would want to vindicate himself by pointing at the NPC's obstinance and demand for more work. The following was just Suzuki Satoru's personal experience, but however bad a company might get, employees could usually tolerate a lot as long as their interpersonal relationships were good. On the other hand, if these relationships were bad, it wouldn't matter how well the company might treat their employees, they tended to break down quickly. Perhaps Nazarick was running smoothly because the interpersonal relationships between its denizens were great. It was a mistake on my part. Forgive me. Ains lowered his head as well. Ains-sama, please raise your head. Ains lifted his head at Albedo's flustered words. Anyhow, as we have both bowed, can I be considered forgiven? There's no need for Ains-sama to. If there comes a day when I can't bow to you people, then that day will be the end of me. That person will no longer be me. Albedo gasped with her eyes wide open and then bowed deeply. The disturbance by Ains's side was likely caused by the twins' surprise at Albedo's reaction. Before Ains could ask her what the matter was, Albedo lifted her head. Ains-sama said that it's a paid vacation, but is there a plan to head somewhere with the two of them in tow? As expected of Albedo. To have noticed that Ains was planning to travel just from the phrase, paid vacation, Albedo was quite fearsome. If it was Ains in her shoes, he would have probably said something like, as the two of them are here, are you planning to spend some leisure time on the 6th floor? I am planning to head to the Elven country in the south with these two. So it's the Elven country. Albedo pondered for a while before speaking again. I see. What do you see? Maybe she was thinking that Ains was heading over there for diplomacy. He had to make sure. Don't be hasty. I am not going there for diplomatic reasons. I just want to observe their state of affairs. Understood. A simple reply. Ains thought she was going to say more. This was way scarier. He had the feeling that a critical misunderstanding was taking root. So I will be going on a journey to the Elven country with these two. If there's something urgent, contact me with message. I will be back immediately, that's all there is, alright. I don't plan on doing anything else, okay. I really don't. Understood. Understood. So will you be setting out soon? Why yes, that's right, he hadn't thought that far ahead, but considering the Theocracy's advances, it would be better for them if they started early. I intend to, but Aura and Mare have to prepare right. I think those two will have no issues. If Ains-sama decided to set out this instant, then it would be natural for them to complete their preparations immediately. Ains wanted to reproach her for saying such things, but the twins also concurred with her. If those two were saying that it's not a problem, then it was not Ains's place to object. I want to be certain about something. Not just Albedo, but Aura and Mare as well. I have a question for all of you. The great underground tomb of Nazarick established the Sorcerer Kingdom, made the Empire its vassal, extended its control over the demihumans of the Wildlands, and had just recently destroyed the Re-Estais kingdom. You could say the size of the organization grew following the expansion of its territory. Well then, I have some apprehensions. Our organization has expanded, but do we have a corresponding expansion in personnel? An organization wasn't something that would stop working just because a person or two were taking a rest. Aura and Mare were certainly part of the top brass. If we were to consider Nazarick as a company, they would be its executives. Normal employees could let their peers substitute for them, but executives did not have that luxury. As such, it would be bad if the organization ground to a halt just because the two of them took a rest. In that case, the plan had to be put on hold and perhaps altered. I am worried about that. We might need to take some drastic measures if that's the case. I don't think there will be any problems. And, if it came down to it, there's always me and Demiurge. If we also have Pandora's actors' cooperation, there will be no issues at all. I see. As expected of Albedo. So there's already a solution in place for my misgivings. Splendid work, worthy of being the moon of the most intelligent beings in the Nazarick and the holder of the title of Guardian Overseer. Absolutely brilliant. I am highly impressed. He praised Albedo with all his heart. Unlike Ains, she was diligently managing the organization. If she did not deserve such praise, then no one did. I am sincerely grateful for your kind words. Albedo regained her posture after a deep bow, but her expression was a little stiff. Another question popped into Ains's head as this happened. It's Aura and Mare this time, but would everything work without issues if you and Demiurge were the ones to take a vacation? Albedo faltered for a bit but immediately answered. I believe that even if we were to be absent, the others would be able to substitute for us without issues. They would do their best to meet Ain-sama's expectations. Albedo. It's not about what you believe. What I want to know is whether or not they could handle it without a problem. Of course, it is hard for you to express doubt about the abilities of the floor guardians, your comrades, and I do understand that it's painful for you. But, can you tell me if they can do it, without your emotions getting in the way? If the answer is that they cannot, then we will have to train them and restructure the organization when we have the leeway to do it. Well, if even someone like me could foresee this, Albedo has probably already looked into it. Excuse me, Ain-sama, sorry for interrupting, but... What's the matter, Mare? Sorry but, I am not confident about being able to do the amazing work that Albedo-san does. After a short silence, Albedo's prickly voice echoed in the hall. Is that all you have to say? What is this? He didn't feel like any of Mare's words just now warrants Albedo's anger. In fact, Ains was in complete agreement with him. Mare. Mare flinched as Albedo shouted. She was seriously angry. Before Ains could stop her, Albedo continued. Did I hear a floor guardian, an elite among elites, say that he can't do the work that's expected of him by a supreme being? Albedo, don't be so loud. What's the problem with someone saying that they cannot do something when that's the truth? In fact, it would be more of a problem if they say that they can, even when they cannot. Forgive me for my insolence, but let me continue. Despite Ains's reprimand, Albedo continued in an even louder voice. But, as it seemed like she was no longer directing her anger at Mare, Ains let her continue. There's no problem with someone saying that they can't do something, but they should also suggest how they could work towards being able to do it. A floor guardian cannot be permitted to say that they are unable to do something a supreme being expected of them and end their words with that. Goo, Ains groaned inside. He couldn't say that Albedo was wrong. What Mare said was certainly not good from that point of view. Ains-sama, I think Albedo is right. Mare should retract his words. Aura said coldly. Being scolded by his own sister, Mare let out some pitiable sounds. As a floor guardian. Stop. Ains shouted angrily to stop Albedo from continuing on. Of course, it was just an act, he was not really angry. The fact that his emotional suppression did not kick in was proof of that. Ains released his aura along with his voice. He had just used the aura's visual effect to take control of the conversation, not to debuff others. He chose to use it because he knew Aura, Mare, Albedo, and even Lumiere were equipped with items that granted immunity against mental status effects. He didn't know what Albedo would have said if he let her continue. Maybe she would have gently explained it to Mare later, but as long as there was a chance that it could result in their relationship breaking down, Ains could not stand aside. Mare. What Albedo said is reasonable. If you express your inability to do something, you should also suggest ways to remedy it. Please forgive me. Be that as it may, Albedo. Don't you think there is a problem with a superior who forces their subordinates into doing something they are unable to? I cannot say there are no problems. I think both of you were at fault this time. I am glad for your loyalty, but anyone could make a mistake. You have to be gentle in correcting them the first time around so that they won't hide their mistakes or repeat them. Honestly, Albedo was just too loyal and too able, so she tended to be hard on others. He thought the only reason it didn't cause any major problems up till this point was because he rejected most of her suggestions on how to deal with others. If Albedo ever received full authority, it would probably end in wide-scale purges. Although I think that's a groundless fear, maybe. Yes, I felt like I was a bit too angry as well. Forgive me, Mare. No, there's no need. Albedo-san was right. I was in the wrong. I am terribly sorry. After they bowed to each other, with Mare taking a deeper bow from the waist, this incident could be considered resolved for now. So, where were we at? That's right. As I will be heading to the Elven country for a paid vacation with these two, I want the twins to make sure that their substitutes will be in place. First of all, transfer your work to the substitutes within 3 days. If possible, entrust it to the area guardians under you instead of the floor guardians. If that's not possible, Ains thought it would be hard for Albedo, as it has been only a short while since the destruction of the kingdom. Discuss it with Pandora's actor, all right. He got an energetic reply from them. So what about Ains-sama's retinue? Will it be Hanzo's? That's not a bad idea, or rather, Hanzo's were just too convenient to use. To be honest, He wanted to summon more if money and data weren't an issue. The Hanzo mercenaries' data was used up, but there was data for other ninja-type monsters in the library still. It would be great if he could use those, but I would rather not use the assets in the treasury if possible, so I'll have to bear with this until I can save up enough personal wealth. Or, should I prioritize strengthening Nazarick defenses first? I should think about this on the way to the Elven country. Ah, I want money. Money I am free to use however I want. I wonder if there's someone with some treasure stashed away. The kind of person who can't complain even if I steal it. Ain-sama. Ah, sorry. It seems like I was lost in thought for quite a while. About the retinue. Ain stopped himself before saying, Hanzos will do. It was generally said that excellent employees were all good at reading the mood. Although Ains was a mediocre employee, perhaps he had rolled a crit just for this moment, because his intuition told him to shut his mouth for a moment. It is because he managed to read some slightly different emotions than usual in Albedo's tone. No, I did not originally plan to take Hanzos along, but is there some work you wanted the Hanzos to do? Ah, no, as you don't plan to take Hanzos this time, it's not my place to object to Ain-sama's decision. Albedo hesitated for a bit as she tried to read Ains's mood from his face. Some have been vocally complaining that the Hanzos were the only ones being called upon so much. There are a lot of people who want to work for Ain-sama, so I wanted to ask if they could be given a chance. As Ain started to contemplate it, Albedo immediately shook her hands in a fluster. It's already good enough that Ain-sama is now aware that there are people eager to serve given the chance. Ains mentally facepalmed while responding with an, Yumu. Ains, Suzuki Satoru was just an ordinary person, so he never imagined that such a problem could exist. He was using the Hanzos a lot, for sure, but to let others have such an impression was pretty bad. Favoritism would always exist within a company. It was natural that it would be easier for people who were liked by their superiors to be promoted even if their talent was a little inferior compared to their colleagues. That said, favoritism would cause the social relations inside the company to worsen. That was not good. Was he not just thinking that even though Nazarick was a black company, it was somehow running smoothly because of the strength of its internal social relations? He couldn't say, I will just take the Hanzos, in such a situation. Well, let's just decide the retinue later. No, we should at least inform them soon. It'll be interesting to see who I choose and how you prepare so that my choice wouldn't matter, don't you think? Ains gave a smile, while feeling entirely different in his heart. Albedo bowed her head with an expression that said, I see. As expected of Ain-sama. Understood. I will immediately inform all the denizens of Nazarick. Yumu. I am relying on you. Ain stood up and left the room with only Lumiere following him. He then let out a large sigh like a salaryman who had just ended his workday. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. Albedo lifted her head on hearing the door close and her eyes met with the other two who had lifted their heads at the same time. About that, Albedo, I want to ask you something. What is it? Albedo responded as she stood up. Although Ain-sama said he is visiting the Elven country on paid vacation, what do you think is his goal? There's no way he is just thinking about enjoying himself, right? Of course. Is that so? The supreme ruler of Nazarick, Ains Ul Gaon, was a wise king whose every single move might contain many meanings behind it. One should think there were at least 3 goals behind each of them. One's position as a king was not a thing to be taken lightly. It's not like a coat that one could don and doff according to their mood. Even if he said that he was on vacation, even if the other countries believed it, he was still the illustrious king of the Sorcerer Kingdom at the end of the day. Each and every movement of his could be thought of as having the Sorcerer Kingdom's agenda behind them. Any idiot could understand that. Therefore, it stood to reason that there was another meaning hidden in his act of taking a paid vacation to the Elven country. Then what do you think Ain-sama's goal is? As he mentioned, improving the organization was probably a part of it, but collecting intel is probably the main goal. Albedo said as she pondered. I think Demiurge could probably give a better answer. The Theocracy should be deploying a large-scale offensive against the Elven country right about now. Why you mean the Theocracy? Information regarding the Theocracy was circulated around Nazarick, so there was no need to explain the fundamentals. Yes. After finding out that their hypothetical enemy, the Sorcerer Kingdom, has entered into conflict with the kingdom, they would naturally try to finish their war with the elves once and for all. Because it would be bad to fight on two fronts, right? That's right. Although the theocracy is not at war with us right now, considering the future situation, it's best not to divide their forces between the northern and the southern fronts. In that case, it's highly likely that they are moving out a large force to attack the elven country. It's hard to think they will have peace talks at this point, but I am not sure. For Albedo, it was not a problem if the elven country was destroyed by the theocracy. On the contrary, it was even better for them if the theocracy enslaved the elves so that they could gain the great casus belli to liberate the elves. That could increase the amount of options they had against the theocracy, but it seems like their master thought differently of the situation. Perhaps he was going there because he wanted to gain more information before making a decision. Demiurge would have probably answered with certainty if he was here. Albedo had a leg up over Demiurge when it came to internal affairs, but she had to concede to him on military issues. She had always lost to Demiurge in that subject. While this thought formed in her head, she tilted her head wondering why Demiurge was so silent regarding this matter. Is Demiurge making moves while keeping it a secret from us? Is he planning something by collecting intel on the situation within the elven country secretly? I don't think that's the case, but as Demiurge often worked outside of Nazarick, he received more discretionary powers compared to the other floor guardians. Or rather, it was more accurate to say that the other guardians didn't use their privileges as much. That said, he always described the information collected and his actions in very detailed reports, which always ended up being hefty and a bother to read, to their master, which passed through her. That was why Albedo believed that he couldn't be up to something without her noticing it, since she didn't receive any reports regarding the elven country. Considering Demiurge's personality, it's unlikely that he was hiding things. He probably just didn't get around to doing it yet. However, the truth was she couldn't be completely sure about it. She should probably go and meet him immediately after leaving this place. No, she should summon him over. She shouldn't have the talk in his domain, but if she had her subordinates wait at their side during their talk, it was likely that Demiurge would try to sound out her intentions. But if he was to bring his devils along, no, would he even take such short-sighted actions? Is he doubting me? He hasn't made a move yet, so the problem is, are we going to fight the theocracy? Yes, about that. We don't know if it will happen. Maybe even Ainsama isn't sure, and that's why he is using a paid vacation as an excuse. Albedo quickly replied in a fluster, jolted out of her thoughts by Mare's question. Even though she pondered for quite a while, there was no suspicion in the twins' eyes. She decided to save her thoughts on Demiurge for later. Perhaps this time their master was thinking of traveling not as the ruler of Nazarick, but just as an undead on a paid vacation. That way, even if the worst were to happen, the damage to Nazarick would be minimized. Maybe just this once, there were some elements that even Ainsama wasn't sure of, so he is trying to make moves independent of Nazarick. No way. You are talking about that Ainsama, why you know? The two elves raised their voices, filled with surprise, and looked at Albedo with eyes filled with disbelief. Their master's wisdom had managed to read and control everything until now. They saw many times when one of his unremarkable moves ended up being the fatal strike for the opponent. According to what they've heard, he already had a general idea of the next 1,000 years and was making moves accordingly. It was natural to doubt Albedo, who said that their master could be uncertain about something. As expected, even Albedo couldn't completely read through our master's intentions. Albedo directed a bitter smile at Aura, who spoke with her hands crossed behind her head. First of all, it's impossible for anyone to see the depths of Ainsama's great plans. That is something I have experienced repeatedly till now. Frankly speaking, I still don't understand the reason why Ainsama used the word paid vacation. Just keep in mind that as you are going to the elven country, it's highly likely that you will have to face the theocracy. The two guardians nodded with serious expressions. Are we allowed to take along our own subordinates? Other than those selected by Ainsama, you mean? Albedo considered Mare's suggestion. While it could be taken as an affront to their master, it could also possibly make him happy that they prepared some on their own. If Ainsama wants a small elite force, no, wait, Albedo started to consider the matter on a deeper level. Select a group for the smaller retinue and another one in case it's large. Tentatively, on my side I will discuss with Demiurge about Ainsama's goals and inform you later. The way Ain Sama was extremely worried about the deterioration of Nazarik's organizational capacity. Is that also one of the factors this time? Upon informing him that there was nothing to worry about, she was answered with sarcastic praise. It was probably because of her failure to understand the full extent of his unease and her inability to answer the trust placed in her. He was especially worried about that point. For the time being, they had acquired someone who rivaled them in terms of intelligence to work under them. Did he intend to say that even that is not enough? Or was it something else? Albedo spoke after she heard the twins acknowledging her suggestions. I think we will get a hint of Ain Sama's intentions from his choice of personnel for the retinue, but I expect the work this time to be of an extremely high level. Take notice of everything without lowering your guard and keep your wits about you at all times. The two guardians gave a spirited response to Albedo. Considering their combat strength, she was sure that they would be able to protect their master, but one should never be careless. She should discuss with Demiurge and prepare for the total mobilization of Nazarik just in case. Even though it will slow down dealing with the remnants of the kingdom, we should prepare for it just to be sure. Albedo left the room with the other two while arranging the order of her duties inside her head. 1,490,823 feet greater than Chapter 2, Nazarik-style traveling experience. 1. It could be said that there were no choke points in the great forest of Evisha where the elves reside. There were certainly places with dangerous monsters, small nations of demihumans, and impossible labyrinths, but there were no structures that could be called a fortress or impassable physical barriers. However, there existed a place that could be called a choke point. It was the work of a single person. The Holocaust Scripture's vice captain, Shoin, tried looking ahead of him while he hid behind the scattered trees. There sat a girl of around 8 years old who looked even younger than her age would suggest, as elves tended to. She was sitting on a small chair on top of a slight incline, holding a bow too large for her. There was a quiver beside the chair with a few arrows poking out of it. There were fewer arrows in that small quiver than could be counted with both hands, but they were informed beforehand that the arrows would never run out. There was no doubt that it was a magic item. No one was around except for the girl. That was what scared him. A hero could overturn the tides of battle by themselves. You could say that one of them was equal to an army of 10,000. In fact, this girl in front of him had already taken over 1,000 lives from the Theocracies army. An army of 40,000 was being nailed down by a single girl sitting primly on a chair. The recommended strategy in such situations was to move around the obstacle. It wasn't like they had to break through from here. The great forest itself was a natural barrier, but it was not impossible to take a detour. That said, the opponent was not an army, but a single combatant. It was easy to take note of an enemy's movements if they were in large numbers, but this girl was more than just an exceptional combatant. As an individual, she would also be more mobile than their army. Once they lost sight of her, it would be hard to find her again. If an enemy capable of fighting an army alone was left to their own devices in the dark depths of the great forest, there was no need to say that the vanguard's morale would take a plunge. They could also try and delay her by pinning her down with a small force while letting the larger force advance. That was not exactly a bad idea, except for the fact that it was idiotic to divide their forces in a hostile land. So, it could be said that this was their best chance, while the opponent was deployed, although, it's doubtful if sitting on a chair could be considered as deployment like this. The top brass decided that she should be dealt with while they knew of her location, even if they had to sacrifice some of their forces. Only a hero could stand against a hero, goes the aphorism. Nothing would be solved by sending in the riff-raff. There were no heroes within the Theocracies invasion army this time, so it fell to the Holocaust Scripture to deal with this. But there were no heroes in the Holocaust Scripture either. There used to be one, but he was transferred to the Black Scripture. In the Theocracy, anybody who stepped into the realm of heroes would be moved to the Black Scripture. Unfortunately, Shoin is yet to step into that realm. Despite that, they were sent to this battlefield because it was widely believed that the Holocaust Scripture could take down a hero when they worked as a team. And that's true. The Holocaust Scripture can kill heroes. But, there was a large difference between those who just stepped into the realm of heroes and those who were nearly outliers. Even if they could win against the former, it was impossible for them to triumph against the latter. That was why Shoin was observing the girl seriously. Common soldiers, stronger soldiers, elite soldiers, heroes, and outliers. Shoin, who had seen beings of various levels, had enough knowledge and intelligence to measure her strength accurately and minimize their casualties as much as possible. Although not comparable to the Black Scripture, the members selected for the Holocaust Scripture were elites in their own right, but you could say the same for any of the 6 scriptures. He didn't want them to be killed for no reason. Depending on her strength, he might have to give the order to sacrifice some soldiers to hold her back while they waited for the Black Scripture to get dispatched from the theocracy. Shoin slowly let out a slow, long breath. Though he was hiding behind the trees with invisibility, and silence was not originally an arcane spell, but this version was developed for use by magic casters, he still had to be mindful even when taking a breath. He wanted to wipe the sweat off his forehead, but considering any of his movements could lead to certain death, he chose not to. Shoin might be a talented caster, but he was only a little better than the ordinary person at stealth without using magic. The elf girl was probably a ranger or an archer. If it was the former, it was possible for her to sense Shoin even though he was being hidden by magic. She might not know his exact location, but she could just use an area of effect attack, which she was confirmed to be able to do, to smoke him out. Shoin wouldn't die from a single attack even if the opponent was a hero, but he was not confident in escaping smoothly if he was wounded. Even more than his fear of death, Shoin was afraid that he might die in vain without bringing back the intel he collected. But she really was an unpleasant brat. She hadn't made a single move since he started observing her. Her glazed expression makes her look like a doll. But Shoin knew she was a living being, not a doll. After an unknown amount of time since he started his observation, the target finally moved. Shoin's heart flinched, worrying if the target found him at last. However, the target did not look at him, but that didn't mean he could let down his guard. For people who honed their skills to their limits, it was child's play to faint with their eyes. In fact, Shoin knew that such a skill actually existed. With his hearing strengthened by elephant ear, he soon heard a large group of people approaching from behind. They were likely the ones his target noticed. He was sure that they were his peers, soldiers of the theocracy. Shoin suddenly felt guilty, because he knew the reason why they were sent here. He would not warn them, because that's what his duty demanded. Still, he would not leave anything unobserved. That was all he could do. The target's true strength could only be understood if they saw her fight. Those soldiers were the sacrifices the top brass sent for that purpose. They were going to sacrifice the valuable lives of their comrades. Shoin turned to look behind him, making sure he would not get noticed by the target. His eyes, strengthened by the second-tier magic, Hawkeye, spotted an arrow flying over. The lone arrow bent around the trees in its path and then, it scattered into multiple arrows midair, turning into a rain of arrows that covered a large area. The arrow was not probably aimed at anything specific. Even if she could locate her target through sound, this was in the middle of the forest. It was impossible to snipe accurately with all the trees around. But something like a fireball would be able to burn beyond these obstructions. She was just emulating it by combining the ability to weave through the gaps between the trees with the ability to multiply the arrows. Shoin's strengthened ears picked up cries of pain from the soldiers. It seemed like no one was left unscathed. Cries. They are still alive. The soldiers milled about in confusion, fearing the arrows that came from beyond their vision. As no one managed to figure out the trajectory the arrows flew in, everyone started to run hither-thither. There was no fighting spirit left in them. They weren't exactly doing the wrong thing. In fact, it could be said they were responding correctly by scattering around randomly, which would let at least a few of them survive. The girl fired another arrow. It weaved through the spaces between trees again and then multiplied. Among the rain of arrows, the sounds of pitiful cries and trampled undergrowth gradually came to a halt. He learned one important thing as a result of the deaths of these soldiers. She couldn't kill an ordinary soldier in a single attack. Of course, considering the ability, martial art, that made the arrows multiply, it stood to reason that each arrow would have reduced precision and damage. That said, a hero could kill every one of those regular soldiers with a single attack. It could mean only one thing. She isn't a hero. That brat didn't step into the realm of heroes. That was Shoin's conclusion. It was because he worked hard to match his rival, the third seed of the Black Scripture, Earth, Wind and Fire featuring water, that he could be sure of his conclusion. T.N. Third seat's title should be, The Four Elements, the same kanji as in various traditions. She was weaker than Shoin, but that didn't mean they could be at ease. The fighting styles of a magic caster and an archer are strong in their own ways. Even if he was stronger than her in general, the battle could still go either way. It was also possible that she was hiding her true strength after realizing she was under observation. But, Shoin, the observer in question, could say with certainty that she didn't notice yet. There was only one thing left for them to do. Remove the obstacle in the path of the Theocracy's advance. He activated silent magic wall of protection from arrows. He didn't feel like that was enough preparation, but she might notice something suspicious and escape. If he tried to do more at this distance, he can only strengthen his resolve. Silent maximized magic arrow. He came out of hiding from behind the tree and activated his abilities at the same time. He also activated the once-per-day trump card of the Arcane Devotee class that Holocaust Scripture required its members to acquire. He used it to access the spell-strengthening metamagics he had yet to learn. Naturally, he chose triplet magic. A total of 12 magic arrows flew out at the same time. One could not escape from these arrows, but unfortunately, the damage of a single arrow was not enough. As long as there's not much difference between the strengths of the opponent and the caster, it would be hard to kill them even with maximize magic. But that was only true if he was fighting alone. All of his subordinates were observing Shoin's movements with see invisibility. Their target's expression changed in an instant. Perhaps it was because she was in pain from Shoin's attack, or perhaps it was because she saw the 100+ magic arrows coming at her from behind Shoin. Holocaust Scripture was entrusted with assassination and counterterrorism work that required them to be flexible, so their teams consisted of at least 4 members, each with different jobs. This was similar to the adventurers' tactics in the kingdom and the empire. As the adventurers' guilds were in fact created secretly by the theocracy, you could even call them brothers in arms. The tactic this time relied upon a team consisting of one common class. On top of that, only those who could use a specific skill were selected. The end result was a team of magic casters who could also use invisibility. Hit. 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 It was like wings of light flew across the sky. The target collapsed on the ground and laid still with her face down. Even so, only Shoin approached her. He didn't think the target, who was an archer, could use it, but there were illusions that could make one appear dead. He can't let his guard down yet. He put his foot under her body and flipped her around. There was not a single part of the child's body that was without wounds from being hit by their magic arrows. Shoin took a closer look at her face. There was no light in the eyes that peeked out from under her swollen eyelids. She was dead for sure. Huh, right back at you, you shitty brat. They didn't select magic arrow just so that it could be an act of symbolic revenge. People like rangers with keen senses could sometimes sense and escape from damage if they were attacked with area of effect spells. Mental attacks were situationally effective at dealing fatal damage in a single blow, but there was a high probability that it would just get nullified. So, since he had others to back him up, he chose to use a method that was guaranteed to hit the opponent. Be that as it may, it was still the best spell they could have used to take revenge for the soldiers killed by her arrows. Shoin wrinkled his brows at the dead child's face. He felt like there was a hint of tranquility in it. Maybe he was just mistaken, but if he wasn't, that would be extremely irritating. This elf killed nearly 1,000 of his comrades from theocracy, so he wanted her to die in painful agony, regretting her actions at the end. Shoin stopped himself before he could spit on her corpse. He had to get the equipment off of her first. He planned to do it here as there were no enemies around. He would probably feel disgusted if he had to touch his own saliva in the process, so he should spit after he took them off her. First, the bow. It was the weapon of an opponent who managed to stop the Theocracy's army by herself. It should be something good. Good grief. Shoin suddenly went stiff upon hearing the nonchalant voice of a man. Although he should have responded immediately, the suddenness shocked him to a stop. Turning to look at the source of the voice, Shoin found a single elf. There wasn't supposed to be anyone here, there was no mistake about that. There should be no elves other than the target present. He even took care to use see invisibility while approaching the target. Human, did you know that fighting with the strong, with one's life on the line, is the fastest way to become stronger? Though I took her away from her mother and threw her into the battle immediately, thinking that she was a success. The voice sounded disappointed. The elf looked at the girl's dead body with scorn. You useless shit. You are even worse than the other failures for wasting my time. As I thought, people who can't bring forth the king's essence are no different than trash. Shoun already understood who the elf was. His heterochromatic eyes were clear enough proof. The final target of the theocracy. A deplorable criminal. It was the Elf King. An existence that even heroes couldn't win against, never mind Shoun. Someone above even the outliers. There was no chance of victory. Silent magic invisibility. Shoun panicked, immediately activated the spell, and moved a short distance. Yet, the Elf King's eyes followed him. Even though he just moved a short distance from the place where he cast invisibility, the Elf King clearly saw him. The moment he realized that, Shoun ran with his back turned to the Elf King. He can't hide the grass being trampled by him even if he was using invisibility and silence, but he couldn't stop running. Still, the Elf King didn't shift his gaze even a bit from Shoun. It didn't seem like he was using invisibility to see him perfectly. He was seeing through invisibility and silence with just his extraordinary sight. That was why Shoun had to create some distance between them. If the opponent was not using anti-stealth abilities to find him, only increasing the space between them would make it easier to hide. For just a moment, he regretted not using fly to escape, but he couldn't do it anyway because of one of the classes he acquired. Adepts of Sarshana had a special ability with a limited number of uses per day. This ability allowed them to extend the effective time of a spell by consuming their mana. Taking advantage of that ability, he had already exhausted most of his mana to maintain his other spells, therefore, he did not have enough mana to effectively use fly. Also, one would have to be mad to use fly, as it made them defenseless while within the reach of the Elf King. Shoun wasn't that desperate yet. It was more practical to use it after he could get far away enough and hide among the trees. Ha! He heard the Elf King scoff behind him. It's meaningless to kill you people, but I went through all this trouble to come here, so I might as well do it to relieve my boredom. As a magic caster, Shoun wasn't exactly skilled at moving his body. Even so, as someone who stood at the boundary to the realm of heroes, he could cross vast distances with little effort. After Shoun managed to get far enough away, the Elf King's voice suddenly echoed in his ears, which were strengthened by elephant ear. Go. Kill everyone, Behemoth. The land shook around him. He understood that something huge had appeared without needing to look. Disperse. He shouted, canceling silence so that his voice could reach his subordinates. He had never shouted so loud in his entire life. If the Elf King grimaced a bit at this, then it's even better. He needed his subordinates to do their best now, even if it meant throwing away some people's lives as sacrifices. Getting the intel back home was the only way to recompense the lost lives. Shoun, who was nearest to the Elf King, would certainly die. So he turned back. If he died before his subordinates, that would be a good thing in itself. He had seen earth elementals before. They were weird chubby-looking things, smaller than humans and with arms too large for their bodies. But the one that stood before him was not such a cute thing. A misshapen body made of boulders and mineral ore, and as large as the trees around it, enough to make one call it the Earth Elemental Lord. Thick and long arms with stout but short legs. Maybe it would have looked comical if it was much smaller, but its arms and legs displayed power that no monster should be capable of. The Elf King stood behind it, looking at Shoun's desperate struggle with a sneer. His attitude was absolutely disgusting. Someone who took lives without betting his own. Unconcerned about things like Shoun's anger, the Elf King immediately closed the gap between them with graceful movements as if he was skating over ice. The Earth Elemental, Behemoth, lifted its two giant arms high into the air. Try me, you piece of shit. Wall of stone. A stone wall was erected between the Elf King and him. In the very next moment, it was broken with a single strike, with its pieces melting away into the air. Though there were other factors, the strength and durability of a wall tended to be proportional to the caster's strength. Even so, no, maybe it showed that the elemental summoned by the Elf King was just that strong. Behemoth immediately lifted its left fist. Shoun saw the Elf King standing there with a satisfied grin from the corner of his vision and understood what he was thinking. He knew what would happen. He was probably thinking that Shoun would die from the next attack. He was certainly not wrong. The Behemoth's fist will reach Shoun before he could cast another spell, and then he will die. Even so. I managed to buy some time. He wasted his opponent's time, even if it was only a few moments, but that is enough. It was more than enough. At least one person would survive to return to the theocracy because of this. It's a defeat for Shoin, but not for the theocracy. In the next moment, Shoin was turned into pulp by Behemoth's fist, with a smile on his face till the very end. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. The Elf King, Decem Hogan, passed through his castle gate, letting out a sigh from feeling unpleasant. It took too much time to return to the castle, which put him in a bad mood. By riding the indefatigable behemoth, he likely returned in the fastest way possible. Even so, wasting time was a bore and he hated the stress it gave him. Retrieving the weapons he gave to his failed creation was certainly not a waste of time, he should in fact be praised for it. The gear he gave her were things he received from his father, things that no one else could make. He could not let them fall into the hands of humans who couldn't understand their value. But, the problem was that there was no one else who could complete such an important task. He didn't have underlings who he could entrust such issues with. It was because all of them were weak. All of them were useless. Elves were a splendid race. His father was the proof of that fact, that they were a race that could become stronger than anyone else. If Decem was a special type of elf like a high elf or an elf lord, he would have concluded that the others were just worse and that would be the end of it. However, that wasn't the case. His father was also just an elf. This meant any elf could become strong. That's why he couldn't understand why the others were so weak. How could he prove that elves were the greatest race? He just had to achieve something that others could see. He just had to make this world the dominion of the elves, of him who held such a revered bloodline. He required excellent, strong females for that. He's got the incel mentality, if that wasn't obvious enough, but he couldn't be sure which females had superior wombs until the children were nurtured. So, he sent all of his children to fight in the war, but almost none of them managed to return. He was bothered by the fact that even after doing this for such a long time, he had no results to show for it. A female approached Decem, who looked quite menacing as he thought about various things. "My king. What is it?" He directed his simmering anger at the female and then slightly widened his eyes with surprise. A strong person's, i.e. Decem's, stare contained within it strong emotions, especially if it was filled with hostility or the intent to kill. As a result, it tended to break weaker beings. Yes, he didn't direct his killing intent at her, only his anger. Even so, weaker beings should still be affected, and though this female went pale, she withstood it. She was just supposed to be a weak female. In that case, how did she withstand his aura? Perhaps it was because he was exhausted. He didn't really care, but he should reward her for being able to withstand it. So, he stopped to look at her. Decem was a merciful lord. How is that child? Who is that child supposed to be? What exactly was she thinking by asking him such meaningless questions instead of first thanking the king for his hard work after a long trip? He lost his motivation immediately. I am asking about Rugi. Rugi. He didn't remember such a name. Decem can't really remember names, because there was almost no one who was worthy enough to be remembered by him. From his point of view, remembering useless names was a waste of memory. It's not that his memory was limited, but there's no meaning to using his memory for unimportant things. In fact, he couldn't understand why so many people try to memorize useless things. The female shifted her gaze to the bow in Decem's hands. So, she died. Something clicked in him. It was about that failure, the one who managed to die even though he gave her such precious weapons. He felt ashamed that half of the blood that flowed in her veins was his own. No, rather, it was because it was not more than half that she got killed by someone like humans. Yeah, she died. Is that so? Her voice trembled. She was also probably feeling ashamed upon remembering that her blood flowed through that failed creation, but that failure was still stronger than her. This female should be even more ashamed. But it was the king's duty to give people a chance. Decem felt moved at how gentle a king he was, that he would show mercy even for the incompetent. Come to my room later. I will give you another chance. Decem started walking without waiting for a reply. He should get these weapons to the treasury first. After he returned from the treasury, Decem washed off the dirt from the battlefield and laid on the bed in his room. While he was waiting like that, a man came requesting his permission to enter. He couldn't see that female anywhere behind him. What is it? I have information for the king. The woman summoned by the king, named Mayuji, has committed suicide. Suicide? Yes. She did it by jumping from the castle. What? She died from falling from just that height? No, I forget that you people are only that strong. Decem pondered for a bit. He couldn't think of a reason for her suicide. First of all, he had just summoned her to his bed, so she should have been joyful. Maybe it's not suicide, but instead, she got murdered by someone who envied her. Are you sure that it's a suicide? Yes. We are sure, as there was someone who saw her do it. Decem thought for a moment that maybe that witness was the murderer, but if it really was a suicide, what could have been the reason? After he mulled it over for a while, Decem finally found the answer. I see. So it's something like that. I understand now. She was sorry for giving birth to a useless daughter and killed herself as an apology, right? Only she can know her true feelings, but you are probably right, my king, the man replied with an expressionless face. In that case, give her a fitting funeral. She used her life to apologize after all. It's a king's duty to forgive others. I am grateful for my king's merciful consideration. Decem nodded regally at the man who was bowing deeply. As he thought, kings should be merciful like this to useless beings. Feeling extremely compassionate, Decem decided to reward the loyal man, he didn't remember his name, in front of him. Do you have any daughters? Yes, I do. You are fortunate. Send them here if they are already of age. If they aren't, your wife works too. The man looked like he was deeply moved. After his body shook all over, he spoke like he was trying to squeeze the words out. Understood, my king. He left the room and Decem proceeded to forget about that female. He didn't care about what happened to some useless female. 2 feet greater than 2. Above the great forest sprawling far south from the Sorcerer Kingdom, to the south of the Theocracy. Ain stared at the land below with the winds raging around him. So this is what they call the Great Forest. It's more like a sea of trees, yes, the Great Sea of Trees. Due to it being nighttime and the deepness of the greenery that extended below him, it looked like it was painted black. When the winds brushed the canopy, waves rippled out just like the sea. He felt like this was the land most suitable to be called the Great Sea of Trees. In fact, this forest was larger than the Great Forest of Taub and the Azerlesia mountain range put together. It might even be larger than the entire kingdom. This is the Great Sea of Trees from now. As far as the Sorcerer Kingdom is concerned, this outrageously large forest had no landmarks to speak of as far as he could see. Various species should have built independent civilizations that changed the surroundings to suit their lifestyles in this forest, but he did not find any signs of those changes from the sky. Maybe they are being hidden by the canopy. Their civilizations probably developed to hide themselves from the sky because there are monsters that can fly, but he did discover 2 things. One was the crescent-shaped lake that was said to be the location of the elven capital. He discovered it comparatively quickly due to its large size. The other one was the earthen road that extended from the Theocracy. It was artificially made by clearing the forest for the advance of the Theocracy's armies. It looked like a thread compared to the gigantic forest around it, but it should be over 100 meters wide. He shouldn't be able to see it from the sky if it wasn't at least that wide. He thought that was a lot of useless work, but there was probably no other way for them to establish a level of safety in this giant forest. Considering the amount of time and labor that road would have required, one could feel the Theocracy's obsession with wiping out the elven country. But I can't understand it at all. Why is this the only thing that stands out? Did the Theocracy stop its advance? If they wanted to destroy the elven villages, wasn't felling the trees and then creating forest fires the best way to do it? The forest was not dry, but it wasn't very humid either. Destroying the elven villages should be easy as long as they took care of their surroundings when they start the fires. They want to take the elves as slaves so they are not burning them down. In that case, it seems like the Theocracy isn't that pressed, maybe there's just that much of a difference between the strength of their forces. He didn't find any burned patches of forest from the sky, but he couldn't be sure considering he was far above the land. Perhaps Aura would have noticed if she was here. And that bunch of lights over there should be the Theocracy's vanguard camp. Humans couldn't see in the dark, so the larger their encampment, the more likely it was bright enough to be seen from far away. But, due to various reasons, especially his position in the sky, it was hard to get a good idea of the distance between the camp and the capital. He had no idea how long it would take the army to reach the capital if they proceeded in a straight line while clearing the forest. Ains believed that he had seen all he needed to see, so he activated greater teleportation. It was easy to be seen from the ground if he stayed in the sky without any cover. There were many people with superior vision, so he certainly couldn't be careless even though it was night. Of course, if the other side noticed him, he could easily escape before they could climb the height of thousands of meters to reach him. Still, there was no merit in letting others know about his presence here. So, Ains did not dispel perfect unknowable. From Ains's analysis of the information he gathered, most of the living beings in this world were weak. Yet, he couldn't say with certainty that there was no one equal to him in regions he had no information on. He should proceed while assuming that, maybe, they do exist. Since the enemy can prepare countermeasures if information regarding him was leaked, a card of his exposed was a step closer to his defeat. Well then, the next should be the Elven capital. Deep in the night. The forest was gloomy with very little moonlight, but that was not an issue to Ains. He came down from the sky using it to float just above the ground so that he wouldn't step on the undergrowth and advanced towards his target. He already understood how far the Theocracies army had advanced. Next, he had to collect information in the Elven royal capital. The space before him opened up gradually. Elven houses were made from short and stout trees called elf trees, and the royal capital where a large number of them were gathered looked like a forest. The construction was the same as in any other elven village, but it was especially striking when they were gathered in such large numbers. Maybe it was because they were denser in the capital, but it was overwhelming enough to pressure even him. Ains felt like avoiding the place because it reminded him of his former great-enchanted world. The trees were cleared around the royal capital and instead converted into a large field of grass. That was not a natural phenomenon, but something the elves did for the capital's defense. It was made to provide better visibility, making it harder for an enemy to approach the capital without being seen. But on the other hand, maybe this could also be considered as the elf tree's survival strategy. He initially didn't feel anything strange when he heard that the elves grew elf trees with magic, but perhaps instead, the elf trees were using the elves to multiply themselves. He could imagine elf trees as a kind of monster. He should probably investigate this more to find out if they were intelligent. Ains tried to see ahead of him as he thought about how to investigate this and whether or not he should entrust it to Mare. There should be guards on the lookout, surveying the coverless grasslands. It would be hard to break through without using magic. That said, it should be possible for an aura-level ranger. High-level rangers had the ability to stay hidden even if there was no cover. If the level difference between them was large enough, it was possible for the observer to not notice anything out of place even if they met eyes with the ranger. He had heard from Aura that the stealth capabilities of a highly skilled ranger was good enough to make you think that they were nothing but a pebble by the road, but Ains had his doubts about the veracity of that claim. He had experimented on their journey here by having Aura go into hiding, but Ains was more or less able to detect Aura when she didn't use any magic items or special abilities to boost her skills. That was because Aura had her levels divided between Ranger and Beast Tamer, and it was also because Ains was just too high-leveled so his base stats were high. Ains felt regret at not being able to personally experience what Aura talked about. Leaving that matter aside, Ains was not good enough at stealth to infiltrate the royal capital without using magic. So, he cast Perfect Unknowable, and on top of that, turned into an elf with illusion magic. Though it would be difficult to break through his Perfect Unknowable, considering the strength of an average person in this world, he still had to be careful just like when he was flying in the sky. That was why he went as far as creating an illusion as well. He never thought for a moment that he knew everything there was to know about this world's special abilities and techniques. After all, Ains's knowledge came from his time in Yggdrasil, and even that was not perfect. He should assume that the other side is using an ability all the time to see through invisibility, just like Ains did. Ains also wore a magic item called the Gilly Gilly Mantle as a part of his stealth setup. Despite covering himself in layers of stealth, he also prepared measures to fool the enemy in case he was discovered. One could never be too careful. Let's start then. After he reached the boundary between the forest and the grassland, there was no cover to be found further in. Ains observed the capital. He could see elves making rounds on the bridges connecting the outer circle of trees that made up the royal capital. They were probably equivalent to a city's walls, the bridges being the allures on said walls. He didn't know if they lacked the skills to see through his perfect unknowable, or if they were just not paying attention, but the soldiers didn't act like they had noticed him. Well, he was going through all this trouble to stay hidden, it would have been embarrassing if they managed to find him so quickly. After he made sure that he wouldn't be in the line of sight of those soldiers, Ains took out a scroll. Then he activated the SCR, he hesitated. He started again, and hesitated. He had resolved to use it before coming here, but even so, he couldn't help but feel that it was such a waste. He turned reluctant to activate the scroll every time a thought flashed by that there should be a better way. He wouldn't have hesitated if he was in a battle with his life on the line, but the fact that he wasn't in such a desperate situation was the root cause of his hesitation. After a while, Ains succeeded in clearing his head and finally activated the scroll. He would have hesitated again if he thought about anything at all. The activated spell was God's Eye. A 9th tier spell that created an intangible and invisible eye. This was probably the first time he used this since that time with the lizardmen. Its range was far greater than remote viewing, and it could also pass through obstacles like walls. While this spell was excellent for spying, you couldn't say that it was the absolute best there was. Though it was invisible, it could easily be detected by 2nd tier detection spells. Plus, even though it was intangible, if it was destroyed in an attack, the caster would receive damage as feedback. Since this was also considered divination, the opponent could find his location through anti-divination measures, or an attack could come flying over if it triggered any automated defenses. The fact that this eye itself didn't have any HP and it wouldn't use Ains's level or defenses was the main issue. Even so, as it was far better than going over there and directly observing, it was valuable at times. It flew at a constant speed, but so slow that Ains felt a bit impatient, and finally reached the city walls. 3 elf guards equipped with bows were patrolling as a team, but no one noticed the approaching God's Eye. Seems like there's no one with anti-invisibility skills here, but I can't be sure that there's no one among the elves who have classes with such abilities. There was no reason for them to overlook the eye if they noticed it, so he should be correct. However, he shouldn't be careless because it was their first intel gathering mission in a previously unknown place. Ains's God's Eye passed under the walkways and entered the capital. He immediately brought the eye back after it just entered the city, and then moved it in front of the 3 guards from before. It appeared that they were talking about something, but they still hadn't noticed the eye. Phew, it's all good. Ains breathed a sigh of relief. Just like Nazarick, guild bases had traps that activated the moment they were invaded, weakening or nullifying certain types of magic. They could break invisibility, reduce the strength of the holy element, etc. Ains checked whether the elven city had any such traps in place. T.N. Ra had, guild home, in katakana, will assume that's a mistake until proven otherwise. He would have to check again at the important-looking locations within the city, but it seemed like the ordinary parts of it weren't problematic. He didn't want to spend too much time maintaining perfect unknowable. Considering the amount of mana he would be left with after this, he really didn't have much leeway. Ains gradually made the eye move into the deeper parts of the city. He wanted to find the elves that resided in trees that corresponded to shops. If he thought of it as a usual town, the shops should be clustered together in a convenient place to reach. Considering that they also had to keep inventory on hand, it wouldn't be strange if they were located in the larger trees. After a while, Ains groaned silently. I can't find them. This city, made out of thousands of trees, was nothing but a forest to the human eye. He couldn't find anything like a signboard because it was night and there were no nameplates on the trees either. It was just rows and rows of trees without any individual characteristics that he could see. He couldn't be sure that the tree he was looking at wasn't the same tree he saw just before. If this was a human city, there would be a thoroughfare with shops arrayed on both sides. They could also be clustered around the main square. He couldn't find any such places here at a glance. With his experience till now becoming useless, he had no choice but to search by intuition. This was a city that was not at all welcoming to a traveler. It was hard, no, it was impossible to find his target amidst this. That said, it was not like he needed to complete everything today. They shouldn't be hasty, but instead, take it slow and safe. Even so, Ains continued his search for a while after that. He had already activated God's Eye, so he might as well use it until it ran out of duration. But Ains could only sigh after his long search. It's no use doing the same thing again when the residents are sleeping. He shouldn't do things without a plan. Even though it would be riskier, he should return to search in the morning. He would probably get a clue by observing the way people moved around. Ains wasn't sure how long it would take to accomplish his goal if he didn't do that. Ains selected a random place and sent God's Eye in. Elves use the walkways between the trees to move around the entrances of their homes, which would correspond to the first or second floor of a human house. So he decided to infiltrate from the first floor. It was the same principle as a thief looking through drawers. Starting from the second floor would make for terrible pathing. After God's Eye passed through the wall, it flew up until it found elves sleeping on the third floor. He found a father, mother, and 2 boys sleeping there. It seemed like this house belonged to a family. I already heard about this, but how primitive. The 4 of them were sleeping soundly on a large amount of leaves collected in what was supposedly a bedroom. Human villages also used dried grass in place of a mattress, so maybe this was similar to that. According to the elves in Nazareth, this was what a normal elven bedroom looked like. Although it took a lot of work to collect a large amount of leaves, they could be used for a long time without any issues. When he asked them about being bitten by insects, they replied that a spell was cast on the leaves to prevent that. The children, the 2 boys, were pleasantly sleeping with slow, calm breaths. Sleep? Huh, how did it used to feel like? A long time had passed since he gained this body. This body's lack of the 3 basic needs and its insensitivity to pain was probably the reason he managed to not collapse till now, but he still felt some regret about it. When he sees such pleasant sleeping faces, he feels nostalgic and a bit envious. Even more so when he sees tasty food. Good grief. Ains shrugged and activated greater teleportation, arriving in front of a large curtain made of vines. It was not weird to see such veils made of vines in the forest, but if one looked at this curtain closely, they would find that it was skillfully hiding a small cottage behind it. This had been their party's temporary base for these past few days, a green secret house created by a magic item. Fenrir, who was sitting beside the green secret house, slowly stood up to sniff its surroundings, letting out a growl while glaring in Ains's direction. But his line of sight was a bit off. Just like Aura back then, even Fenrir couldn't completely sense someone being hidden by perfect unknowable. Rather, it should be praised for the fact that it even managed to sense Ains while he maintained perfect unknowable. Ains cancelled the spell. Now that it could see Ains, Fenrir bowed its head with a look of remorse on its face. Although it couldn't talk, Fenrir was rather intelligent. Its act of bowing its head was not the instinctual act of a beast but clearly conveyed its apology to Ains. But Ains didn't think that Fenrir was at fault here. From its point of view, he had been just some unknown intruder that suddenly appeared here. This was the natural reaction for a guard protecting its master. It would have been more problematic if it hadn't responded like that. He had only brought this Fenrir with them instead of the usual Hanzos this time. Although Ains said that he would take a lot of high-level underlings with him, he did not stay true to his words due to certain reasons. In the present situation, where he couldn't predict how his plan to obtain friends for the twins would work out, he didn't want to expose information to others if possible. And the other reason. He stopped allowing the Guardians to head out alone after Shaltir's brainwashing incident. But what was the result? Even though Nazareth started being more active since then, the enemy didn't appear again. The only one who fell for the bait was a platinum-armored man named Riku Agnesia when Ains, who was actually Pandora's actor, appeared alone. It was like the enemy who brainwashed Shaltir didn't exist at all. That was why. Since he managed to fish out Riku when there were no Hanzos around, maybe the enemy had a way to detect the presence of the Hanzos. Perhaps it's some ability of a world-class item. Or perhaps with some kind of talent. Therefore, he was performing a dangerous experiment by not bringing the Hanzos along. He informed Albedo of this reason, but even Ains could see that there were a lot of faults in his reasoning. She was persuaded by his spiel, smiling all the while, which made him doubt if she was really persuaded. Maybe he would get a talking to after he returns. Good work. Ains left Fenrir with a curt greeting, feeling a little somber. He then put his hand on the green secret house's door, so camouflaged that one couldn't find it without knowing that it was there beforehand, and pushed a little. The door didn't move. Unfortunately, As this magic item did not have a keyhole, though it could be forcibly opened by something like Epinoi, one had to request someone inside to open it once it was locked. Ains used the door knocker. One could look out from the green secret house by making the door translucent from the inside. After a few moments, he heard the door being unlocked. And then it opened. Welcome home. We welcome come, home. The one who replied energetically was Aura. Mare slowly followed with his welcome, his eyes completely drowsy. Both of them have changed into pajamas, Mare going as far as wearing a nightcap. Of course, this was the correct appearance given the time. Sorry for making you both wait so late into the night, Ains said as he entered. The space inside was filled with a warm light and was far larger than one would expect from its outer appearance. You would directly enter the living room from the door and you could see the kitchen and other rooms from there. There were also 4 doors that were connected to the individual rooms. No, we expected it to take more time when we were informed that you could be late. I thought so as well, but let's not talk while standing here. Let's sit over there. He wanted to tell Aura that it was fine to go to sleep. But he should still share the gathered intel with them, even though it's just a meager amount. Ains didn't put much trust in his ability to remember, so it's better to do it as soon as possible. While feeling a bit guilty about making them go along with his selfish reasons, he invited them into the living room to talk about what he saw. Sitting on the chairs there, he found Aura looking attentive in contrast to Mare, who already dropped his head onto the backrest with his eyes half closed. He looked like he would go to sleep any time now. Ains felt even more guilty when he compared them to the sleeping children from before. Am I not being considerate about those who need sleep because I don't need any? This is bad. Why don't we let Mare go to bed? I won't mind if you informed him about our talk in the morning. Good grief. Aura slapped Mare's head. Wake up. You are being rude to Ains-sama, you know. Fua. Oh, welcome back. Mare gave a small bow. Ains couldn't mock that they already went through that. This child, really? Aura was getting angry at Mare's attitude. It's not good to force someone to stay awake. It can affect tomorrow's opera. Ains shut his mouth suddenly, remembering himself from his Yggdrasil days. Of course, he believed that it didn't affect his office work, but was that really the case? Also, it was different when you did it to entertain yourself versus when you were made to do so for others' convenience. Ains, Suzuki Satoru used to complain when he had to stay late because of his boss. First of all, he shouldn't be comparing children to adults, but it could also be considered wrong to compare a child with the astounding physical ability of a level 100 NPC to an ordinary adult like Suzuki Satoru. The two of them stared at Mare, whose eyes, half closed from drowsiness, looked like he was glaring at them. Mare's head suddenly slid, causing him to panic with his eyes wide open. He then returned his head to its previous position. He was nearly at his limit. Well then, let's do it like this. Mare can go to sleep to not affect tomorrow's work. His wits will become dull if you forcefully keep him awake, and that's not a good thing. Can you inform him in the morning about what we will talk about here like asked before? She should have immediately agreed to Ains's orders. Instead, she made a complicated expression, probably thinking that Mare's behavior was too slovenly for a guardian. However, it was just for a moment. She deeply bowed, as if she just persuaded herself in her mind. Understood. I will immediately take Mare back to his room. Can you stand? He can't even give a legible response to Aura, so standing is out of the question. Let me carry him. Aura looked like she wanted to say something, but Ains ignored her, stood up, and lifted Mare in his arms. Perhaps because Mare had changed into pajamas and was only minimally equipped, he found Mare to be quite light. No, normal children probably only weighed about this much. It would have been harder if he was fully equipped, though it's not like I couldn't carry him even then. That thing is really heavy, perhaps the heaviest of all of the Guardian's equipment. Probably talking about Mare's staff. Since both of his hands, he could have carried him with one hand if he wanted to, were occupied, he let Aura go before him to open the door. He entered Mare's room and led him down slowly onto the bed. He had already closed his eyes and was taking slow calm breaths. He probably started sleeping while he was in Ains's arms. Ains silently exited the room, taking care not to make any sounds. Aura followed him even more silently, as expected of a ranger. Both of them returned to the living room and took their seats again. Immediately, Aura bowed her head and started speaking. Please forgive us for taking a rest while Ain-sama is working so hard. I apologize on Mare's behalf. You'd be right to be angry and feel uneasy about his work ethic as a guardian, but let me assure you that we would usually equip items to remove our need for sleep if we have work to do at night, and you wouldn't see such a slovenly appearance from us. If you were to ask us why we didn't do so today, it's because our strength in battles would be reduced a bit, as equipping the item meant leaving out our battle-focused equipment. So we decided not to equip the item as we will be standing on guard to protect Ain-sama. Aura quickly explained. He could feel her anxiety peeking through her uncharacteristic way of talking. No, you don't have to worry so much. We are here on vacation after all. There's nothing wrong with sleeping early. More importantly, what about you, Aura? Don't you feel sleepy? No, I would never show you such an unbecoming appearance like that. Too stiff. I am not feeling angry at all. Rather, I feel happy that I got to see a different side of Mare, you know. You people always end up being too formal in front of me. I now feel extremely curious about how others behave normally. Like, say, how about Cocytus? There's not much difference from the normal Cocytus. Aura returned to her normal expression. I see. In that case, should I secretly have a look using perfect unknowable while he is alone? Ain subtly smiled. Although his face didn't show it, his voice probably relayed his feelings, and Aura too joined in with a smile akin to that of a pranking kid. Well then, are you sure you don't want to sleep? I am usually awake around this time, so I don't really feel that sleepy. According to her, it was common for her to stay awake late into the night to play with those of her monsters that were nocturnal. This playing seemed to be important for beast tamers, as the monsters would build up stress and wouldn't operate at full potential if they skipped it. That said, it was not like she was reducing the amount of time she spent sleeping. She just slept late into the day following the night she stayed awake. So, it was something similar to a night shift. By the way, if any of the twins had to head outside of Nazarick, they would equip the aforementioned item to skip sleep and stay alert. What should I do about this? It's natural that the persons in charge would be working hard, but shouldn't the races that need sleep be better off sleeping? Especially children who need a good rest for their growth. Maybe I should discuss it with Albedo. That aside. After he took a breath, Ains talked about the Theocracies camp he saw in the Great Sea of Trees, though he did not manage to figure out their troop strength or how far away they were from reaching the Elven capital. It was just enough to know their armies were still advancing. Coming to blows with the Theocracy is not a part of Ains's present mission. Then, he started explaining the more important matter of his exploration of the Elves' royal capital. He talked about everything that happened without hiding anything. There was no use in hiding such matters. He just had to be honest when something was impossible. Also, Aura was different from those two. Maybe she would take his words as they were and give him better ideas about how to proceed. Is that so? Aura, who heard his explanation, nodded slightly. In that case, we should observe them during the day just as Ain-sama says. I am planning to do so, but what are you two going to do during the time? About that, it's better if I don't infiltrate, right? You are right. I think there's a very low chance of you getting discovered, but we still don't have enough information to be sure. It's better not to leak who we really are in the present situation. In that case, I will talk with Mare tomorrow about his task. But I am planning on cooperating with Ain-sama. How about I investigate the surroundings of that city to find any tracks left by the elves? Ains nodded in agreement. If goods were being transported to the royal capital, they should leave some kind of trail behind, however faint. The more used trails are no different from roads. If they manage to find them, they could also expect to find places frequented by the elves like the elven settlements at the other end of the road. All of this rested on the assumption that the elves didn't use something like Forestwalker, but Aura's idea was very good. There wasn't a single reason for Ains to object to it. It's a splendid idea. To search all the areas around would probably not even take a day for you. Work with Mare to search for any trails left behind by them. I'll be relying on you. Okay, understood. In that case, I will once again conduct some intelligence gathering during noon tomorrow. Actually, it's today, considering the time. Then I will conduct the search at night because I feel like it's easier to get noticed in the day. Yumu, I will leave it to you. Well then, let us go to bed as well. Good night, Aura. Okay. Good night, Ains-sama. Ains stood up along with Aura. He went separate ways from Aura to the room designated to him, entered it, and laid on the bed. But Ains didn't need to sleep because he is an undead. He ended up taking out a book from the item box. It was one of the books on management he had been reading a lot, titled, To Become a Good Leader. To be frank, he didn't feel like reading these books was helping him, but it was probably better than not reading them at all. Ains started turning over the pages. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. Ains was in a daze for a while. He wasted 2 precious scrolls on infiltration on the first night and the noon of the second day. Only on the noon of the third day did Ains finally manage to find important intel. That being said, the only things he found were the trees with shops, but this did let him get a sense for the capital's layout. It was just a small step for others but a giant leap for Ains. He was so happy that his emotional suppression was triggered. Therefore, he resolved not to waste this chance. Ains made sure to remember the route to the shop. He retreated at that point. There was certainly still some active duration left for the spell. Although he felt extremely curious, wanting to send the god's eye over to the awfully wide and large tree that was the royal castle and take a peek, he managed to control himself. In human civilizations, kings were not always the strongest beings around. This was probably for 2 reasons. One was that it would be hard for humans to prosper if they followed the strongest instead of the ones who could make better decisions. It was the survival method of a species that was nothing but prey for the other races, who were weaker than the others but also more populous. The other reason was that they occupied comparatively safer areas. That was what was special about the kingdom, the empire, and the Holy Kingdom. However, for the races who lived in a land that required clashing blades with other races, it was natural to have the strongest of them be the king. The elf king was then probably a strong person. In that case, they should not invite meaningless danger after going through all this trouble to be careful. He had collected various pieces of information on this world until now, but he had yet to meet a strong being that could match him and wasn't a monster. Maybe if he hadn't met that mysterious warrior called Riku, he would have been careless and would have looked down on the elf king. Instead, meeting Riku made him more cautious than ever before. He dispersed the eye and cast greater teleportation. Ains returned to their base and exchanged the intel he found with the 2 mare with his eyes completely open this time, who had just returned earlier. He was informed that although they had wasted the second day before realizing the elves were using the trees to travel, they finally found success in finding multiple trails. It might take different amounts of time to investigate them depending on the distance to the nearest settlement on those roads. Ains expressed his unease about being seen by the elves using those roads if they decided to investigate them. In response, Aura said that they would travel along the road on the ground with Fenrir. She confidently proclaimed that as long as they were inside the forest, they would not get discovered. She was so sure of her opinion that it made Ains think his worries were unfounded. Even so, Ains did not give his go-ahead for the moment. Instead, he requested them to wait for a while longer. He would likely be getting his hands on some good intel today. And so, on the night of the third day, Ains approached the Elven royal capital again using Perfect Unknowable. Naturally, he infiltrated from a different spot, one he hadn't visited before. He couldn't guarantee that he didn't leave any marks behind on his previous incursions that some excellent ranger among the elves managed to notice. He always moved using Fly so as to not leave any marks behind, but that was just from Ains's point of view, who was a layman when it came to stealth and search. He was not confident enough to proclaim that he didn't break any branches or make the leaves bend in strange directions on his way here. Honestly, I sometimes wonder why I am being so careful. But it would be bothersome if the nearby elven villages started thinking that some mysterious entity was prowling around. It would be especially troublesome if they were to be captured by Theocracy and then leak that information to them. It was highly unlikely that this mysterious entity would be traced back to the Sorcerer Kingdom, but letting the Theocracy know that there was a third faction nearby would be bad. He was afraid of how the Theocracy would react to that intel. Their unanticipated reaction could throw his plans into disarray. It wouldn't be a bad idea to pause this now and have a discussion with Albedo and Demiurge, but if I were to do that, my plans for Aura and Mare to make friends would be disturbed. Therefore, the only option left to Ains was to be as careful as possible. Ains took out a scroll and quickly activated it. He didn't hesitate because he was sure there would be concrete results to show for it this time. Good. Ains whispered after infiltrating the target's elf tree with God's eye. His target was sleeping, buried in a mountain of leaves. It was a male elf. Elves were fundamentally a slender race, shorter by about 10 to 20% when compared to humans. In addition to that, they barely had any body hair and didn't grow beards. As they also looked like young adults for a long period of their life, it was extremely hard to estimate their age from their external appearance alone. Most of them look far younger than their real age. Therefore Ains was not certain that this elf held the information that he wanted, but there was a reason Ains chose him as his target despite that. It was because the elf lives here alone. Abducting an entire family would cause trouble later, but it was easy if it was just a single person. He also had another reason, but that can only be confirmed later. As he already memorized the route, Ains directly teleported over with greater teleportation. The elf didn't wake up at Ains's intrusion. Rather, it was a given that he wouldn't even be able to sense Ains unless he was a high-level ranger. Ains then cast the 4th tier spell, Charm Species, on him. The spell triggered without fail thanks to him being asleep and the large gap between their levels. Wake up, Ains spoke to him. His perfect unknowable was dispelled the moment he cast a spell with the intent to harm, or to be more precise in gaming terms, if his magic triggers some resistance. He continued to wake him while shaking his shoulders gently with his hands, being careful not to cause him pain. Nah. The elf mumbled like an idiot, but it couldn't be helped as he was just woken up now. Don't resist, okay? Ains ended with that and activated greater teleportation, while he held the elf's hand. This spell allowed one to teleport with other people, but they had to be in agreement and not resist the teleportation. It worked here because the charmed status was considered as agreement. The dominated status should also work in the same way, but he didn't use this harder to resist and higher tier option because he was on guard against certain things. This kidnapping was perfect in execution. You could even call him a first-class criminal. Good. Just like I planned. Of course he would be happy because his plan was going so smoothly. While he had a wide smile on his bony face. Wah. What the hell? What is this? Upon seeing the sudden change in his surroundings and feeling the ground underneath him, the elf jerked up and turned completely awake. He didn't look like he was still thinking that this was a dream. Or maybe the elves didn't have the concept of a dream world in the first place. Don't make such a loud voice. Even if you told me not to. I used teleportation magic. Calm down. There's no one here who would harm you. Teleportation magic. The elf continued to panic silently. The only reason he stopped was because the charm magic was still in effect. Well, we are here. Ains opened the half-open door completely and led the elf into the green secret house. Aura and Mare should be observing them from the gaps of their room's slightly open doors. He also thought about letting the captive see them, who were dark elves, in hopes that it would make him speak more freely. But considering the troubles that this might end up causing in the future, he decided not to. Although the dark elves weren't considered enemies by the 3 captured elves, the situation could be different now. Maybe dark elves were now considered enemies in the royal capital. Of course, it wouldn't be a problem if Ains said, they are not enemies, to him. What is this place? Don't tell me this is the world of the divine tree. Ains didn't know a thing about this world of the divine tree, but he could guess that it was probably something from their myths and legends. Or, perhaps, is it related to some player from Yggdrasil? There's a need to investigate, but I don't want to spend too much time here. I will do it sometime later. Ains made him sit on a sofa in the living room and took a memo pad out. It contained a list of bullet points with the questions he needed to ask. He couldn't waste any time. If something failed in the process, he would have to kill the guy. Although it was extremely unlikely, someone suddenly disappearing from the royal capital could still cause problems in the future. Tell this friend of yours about various things you know, in as few words as possible. Ains continued without waiting for his reply. Is there a possibility that you will die if someone used magic or other means to get information from you? No way there's going to be anything like that on me, right? The guy looked like he had no idea what Ains was talking about, but there was a possibility that the elf just didn't know even if there was such a trap. If I remember correctly, it took 3 questions before it was activated that time. Ains took such scenarios into account while he prepared the questions in the memo, so he just needed to go through the list from top to bottom. Do you know any dark elf village's location? I don't know the exact place, but I do know their general location in the Great Forest. It sounded like it was further south from the royal capital. He went into more detail, saying that it was in a place called the Three Trees, where the trees were huge. But Ains couldn't make any sense of it as he didn't know the layout of this area. He would have to rely on Aura, who was listening in. Continuing to the next question. When he was making this memo, the twins were surprised that he didn't include this question. Now that he thought about it, it did look important, so he moved on to the third question. Tell me what you know about the theocracy. The theocracy? That horrid country of humans. Those shitheads are attacking us for no reason at all. A country without honor, that attacked us while we were unaware, a bunch of wretches who kidnapped hundreds of elves, so started the guy's denunciation of the theocracy, which continued on with vigor until Ains stopped him in a fluster. But it did seem like the guy, who was only a commoner, didn't know how far the theocracy had advanced. He wasn't even sure if the elves were winning or losing. However, seeing the patrols moving in a tense mood compared to before, the common opinion among the elves was that the situation was not good. 3 questions were asked, but there was no indication of anything happening to the elf. As he thought, that time was an exception. In that case, he could ask the elf everything he wanted to hear about, but he couldn't really spend that much time with him. How are the relations between the elves and the dark elves? They aren't bad, right? Not really, I think. Before Ains could ask him the reason for the slight pause, the elf started speaking again. I don't dislike them, and I don't think those around me have any bad feelings about the dark elves either. For us, they are like some kind of distant relatives. But this is only about how we feel, and we don't know how the other side thinks about us, you know. We rarely meet them, so I don't have a clue about what their feelings are. Do you know anything about the Sorcerer Kingdom? What's that? Instant reply. Well, he expected this, so he wasn't surprised. Anyway, he determined that nothing in the information acquired just now constituted a hindrance for the plan to make friends for the twins. That's all I wanted to ask. I am grateful. It's all good, aren't we friends?